Let's explore the remarkable story of Catherine of Aragon today. Queen of England for what, nearly 25 years?
Almost exactly. From 1509 to 1533, as Henry VIII's first wife.
But she was Princess of Wales first, through her marriage to Arthur, Henry's older brother.
That's right. She was born Catalina, way over in Alcalá de Henares, Spain, December 16th, 1485.
Youngest child of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. Some serious power players there.
Absolutely. Two of Europe's most influential rulers. So our goal here is really to get a sense of the key moments in her life, understand her importance.
Okay, let's start with her family background. Quite the dynasty she came from.
Oh, undoubtedly. Her siblings included Joanna, who became Queen of Castile and Aragon herself,
Right.
and Isabella and Maria, who both ended up Queens of Portugal. And her brother John was Prince of Asturias.
So she was right in the thick of European royalty from birth.
Exactly. That context is crucial.
And her appearance. Do we have a good idea of what she looked like?
We do have some descriptions. Contemporary accounts suggest she was relatively short, but had quite striking features.
Oh, like what?
Long red hair, wide blue eyes, a round face, fair complexion. It gives you a bit of a picture, doesn't it?
It does. Now, here's something fascinating. Her connection to England wasn't just through marriage. It went deeper, didn't it? Through her own ancestry.
That's such a key point. Her mother, Isabella, descended from the English House of Lancaster.
How so?
Well, her great-grandmother was Catherine of Lancaster, and her great-great-grandmother was Philippa of Lancaster, both daughters of John of Gaunt, who was Edward III's son.
So English royal blood.
Yes, and interestingly, Henry VII's own claim to the throne was, well, less direct in some ways. Catherine's lineage arguably gave her a stronger legitimate claim through John of Gaunt's earlier wives.
Even though their children were technically barred from succession at first.
Initially, yes, but it shows her connection wasn't just Spanish. It was deeply tied into English royal history even before she set foot there.
So the marriage wasn't just a foreign match. It kind of shored up the Tudor claim at home, too.
Yeah.
And she wasn't just royal. She was incredibly well educated.
Exceptionally so, especially for a royal woman of that era. Her tutor was Alessandra Geraldini, and her studies covered a huge range: arithmetic, canon and civil law, classical literature, genealogy, heraldry, history, philosophy, religion, theology.
Wow. That's quite a curriculum.
It really was. And it formed the bedrock of her strong Catholic faith, gave her the intellectual grounding she'd later need.
And languages, too. I remember reading she was quite proficient.
Very much so. Fluent in Castilian Spanish and Latin, of course, but also French and even Greek.
Impressive.
The great scholar Erasmus himself praised her love of literature, said she'd studied deeply since childhood.
So brains as well as breeding. And the usual courtly skills, too.
Oh, yes. Domestic skills, music, dancing, court etiquette, the whole package for a potential queen.
Which brings us to that first marriage, to Arthur, Prince of Wales. A very strategic move.
Absolutely. It was all about politics. Strengthening the still relatively new Tudor dynasty, forging that powerful alliance with Spain's House of Trastamara.
And her English ancestry just made her even more suitable, I suppose.
Precisely, a perfect candidate.
They were betrothed incredibly young, weren't they?
She was only 3. The formal betrothal happened then, with a proxy marriage later in 1499. It shows how long-term these royal plans were.
And her arrival in England in 1501 must have been a big deal.
Huge. They expected her ship at Gravesend initially, and there was this whole plan for a grand flotilla on the Thames to bring her to the Tower of London.
Quite the welcome wagon.
English noblewomen were appointed just to attend her. Major preparations.
What about her first meeting with Arthur? Any sense of how that went?
We don't have loads of detail, but Arthur wrote to Ferdinand and Isabella saying he'd be a true and loving husband.
Okay.
And he apparently told his own parents he was incredibly happy to see his lovely bride.
But there was a slight communication issue at first.
Just a minor one. They pronounced Latin differently, apparently, which made conversation a bit tricky initially.
A little human touch in all the pomp. Their wedding, though, November 1501, Old St. Paul's Cathedral. That must have been spectacular. They were both just 15.
A major state occasion. The dowry agreed was enormous, 200,000 ducats, half paid soon after the wedding.
And she stuck to her Spanish roots in her dress.
Yes, it's noted she and her ladies kept their Spanish fashion, even for the wedding, a very visible statement of her origins.
But their life together was so short. Sent off to Ludlow Castle, and then tragedy.
Arthur had duties as Prince of Wales, presiding over the Council of Wales and the marches. Catherine went with him to Ludlow.
Standard procedure, I guess.
Yes, but just months later, in early 1502, they both fell ill. Possibly the sweating sickness, which was rampant then. Arthur didn't recover. He died in April 1502. Catherine was suddenly a widow at 16.
16. And stranded, essentially, in a foreign country. That must have thrown everything into chaos, personally and politically, especially that dowry.
Absolutely. Henry VIII definitely did not want to return the other half of the dowry, 100,000 ducats, which the contract said he had to if she went home.
So the maneuvering began almost immediately.
Pretty much. Talk quickly turned to marrying Catherine off to his second son, Henry, the Duke of York, who was 5 years younger than her.
A convenient solution for Henry VIII's finances. Weren't there even whispers about Henry VIII marrying her himself?
There were rumors, yes, though likely unfounded, but the main focus became young Henry.
Still, it wasn't a smooth path to that second marriage, was it?
Not at all. When Catherine's mother, Isabella, died, Catherine's value on the marriage market actually dropped a bit.
How come?
Because her older sister Joanna inherited Castile, the bigger kingdom, and then her father, Ferdinand, dragged his feet on paying the rest of the dowry. Lots of delays.
And Catherine's own situation during those years sounds like she was kept in limbo, almost a prisoner at Durham House.
Some historians describe it that way. Her letters to her father certainly show she was unhappy, struggling financially, responsible for her Spanish ladies.
She wrote that famous line, didn't she? I choose what I believe and say nothing.
For I am not as simple as I may seem. Yes. Shows her strength even then, doesn't it? During a really tough time.
But even while stuck in that difficult position, she achieved something quite extraordinary, something often overlooked.
You mean her role as ambassador?
Exactly.
Yes, in 1507, she acted as the Aragonese ambassador to England, which makes her the first known female ambassador in European history.
Incredible. Shows her political line, doesn't it? She wasn't just waiting passively.
Not at all. It required real diplomatic skill.
So, back to the marriage with young Henry. To marry her dead husband's brother, that needed special permission, right? A papal dispensation.
Correct. Canon law prohibited it, so they needed the Pope's okay.
And a key part of getting that was Catherine's own testimony about her first marriage.
She had to swear under oath that her marriage to Arthur was never consummated. Because according to canon law back then, if the marriage wasn't consummated, it wasn't truly considered binding in the same way. So legally, it removed the impediment to marrying Henry.
A crucial legal point for her.
And one she absolutely believed and maintained.
And finally, after all those years of uncertainty, she did marry Henry, just after he became king.
Yes, June 11th, 1509, a private ceremony at Greenwich. She was 23, he'd just turned 18 and taken the throne.
Followed by the big public coronation.
Exactly. June 24th, 1509. Huge procession the day before, massive public enthusiasm. Then the joint coronation at Westminster Abbey, big banquet. The English people seemed genuinely happy to have her as queen initially.
And for a while, things seemed to go well. She even held significant power when Henry went off to war in France.
She certainly did. In 1513, Henry made her regent of England, gave her the titles Governor of the Realm and Captain General. That's serious authority.
While he was campaigning.
Yes. And when the Scots invaded, thinking England was vulnerable,
She stepped up.
big time. She was corresponding with Wolsey, overseeing war preparations. She wrote she was horrible busy with making standards, banners, and badges. She ordered the army to mobilize. She wasn't just a figurehead.
And there's that famous story of her addressing the troops.
Yes. Heavily pregnant, apparently rode north in full armor to give this inspiring speech to the English forces. Real leadership.
And the English won decisively at the Battle of Flodden. Didn't she send Henry a rather grim souvenir?
She did. A piece of King James I of Scotland's bloodied coat. He'd been killed in the battle. She suggested Henry use it as a war banner in France.
A powerful message. Wow. Beyond politics, though, she also influenced the court's culture.
As she got older, her religious devotion deepened, but she also kept up her interest in academics. She made sure her daughter, Mary, got a top-notch education.
Making learning fashionable for court ladies.
Exactly. And she supported academic colleges financially, too.
But looming over everything was the succession issue, the need for a male heir for this still quite new Tudor dynasty. And Catherine faced so much heartbreak trying to provide one.
It's incredibly sad. She had several miscarriages, stillbirths, just terrible losses.
They had one son who lived briefly.
Yes, Prince Henry, born New Year's Day, 1511, but he died within weeks. The only child to survive infancy was their daughter, Mary, born in 1516.
That lack of a male heir must have weighed heavily, personally and politically.
Undoubtedly.
There were also major diplomatic events, like her nephew visiting, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yes, in 1520, a huge state visit. And Catherine strongly pushed Henry towards an alliance with Charles, her nephew, rather than France.
Keeping it in the family, so to speak.
Pretty much. She also went with Henry to that incredibly extravagant meeting, the Field of the Cloth of Gold, in France shortly after.
Right, and Charles came back later, too.
He did when England was at war with France. There was even talk then of betrothing him to the young Princess Mary.
But then, everything changed. The king's great matter, as it's called. Henry's obsession with a male heir and his eye wandering towards Anne Boleyn.
That's the turning point. By the mid-1520s, Henry was completely smitten with Anne, and he'd convinced himself his marriage to Catherine was cursed.
Because she'd been married to his brother Arthur, citing the Bible.
Yes, a specific passage in Leviticus. He believed it invalidated their marriage in God's eyes.
Even though Catherine always insisted her marriage to Arthur wasn't consummated, that must have been infuriating for her.
Absolutely. She maintained to her dying day she was a virgin when she married Henry, but he wouldn't be swayed from his interpretation.
So he started pushing for an annulment, and Catherine fought back. Hard.
She absolutely did. When they suggested she just quietly retire to a nunnery, she famously shot back, "God never called me to a nunnery. I am the king's true and legitimate wife."
What conviction.
Unshakable.
So Henry turned to the Pope for the annulment. But Pope Clement VII was in a tight spot.
A very tight spot. He was basically the prisoner of Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, after the sack of Rome.
So granting an annulment against Charles's aunt, not really an option.
Politically almost impossible. Henry sent envoys, tried everything, but Clement couldn't risk angering the emperor.
Then Cardinal Wolsey got involved, tried to find a way through it all.
Wolsey poured enormous effort into it. He even set up a special church court in England with a papal representative to hear the case.
But the Pope pulled the plug.
Yes. Clement recalled his representative. He wasn't going to let a decision that huge be made in England. Wolsey's failure cost him everything dismissed in 1529.
Didn't he try some secret plotting afterwards?
He did, apparently trying to get Anne Boleyn exiled. It backfired spectacularly. He was arrested for treason, died on the way to face charges.
The stakes just kept getting higher. And while all this was happening, Catherine was effectively pushed out of court.
Banished. A year after Wolsey fell, her royal apartments were given to Anne Boleyn. Her letters to Charles V from this time are heartbreaking. She wrote her suffering felt like it could shorten 10 lives.
Awful. And Henry kept pushing, appointing Thomas Cranmer as Archbishop of Canterbury, someone more sympathetic to his cause.
Exactly. Cranmer held views that aligned with Henry's desire for the annulment. This paved the way for the break with Rome.
But Catherine still had supporters, didn't she?
Yeah.
High-profile ones.
Oh, yes. John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, was incredibly staunch. He famously said he'd die for the sanctity of her marriage, like John the Baptist.
Powerful comparison.
Thomas More, too, Henry's own sister, Mary Tudor. Maria de Salinas, her loyal lady-in-waiting. Emperor Charles V, of course. Pope Paul III, eventually. Even, surprisingly, Protestant figures like Martin Luther and William Tyndale sympathized with her position against Henry's actions.
Quite a coalition.
Yeah.
It's also worth remembering, isn't it, that Henry and all 6 of his wives were actually related, tracing back to Edward I.
Yes, that family tree shows it clearly. Adds a layer of irony to his arguments about forbidden degrees of kinship, doesn't it?
Definitely. So after all the failed attempts, Henry just went ahead and secretly married Anne Boleyn, and Catherine's fate was sealed.
He married Anne secretly after returning from a trip to Calais. Then, in May 1533, Archbishop Cranmer convened a court at Dunstable Priory and officially declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void.
Making the marriage to Anne legitimate in English law.
Exactly. But Catherine never, ever accepted it. She insisted she was the rightful queen until the end.
Her servants continued to call her queen.
Her loyal ones did, yes, but Henry stripped her of the title. Officially, she was only to be called the Dowager Princess of Wales.
Her last years sound bleak. Moved around, isolated, finally confined at Kimbleton Castle. Forbidden contact with her daughter Mary.
It was incredibly harsh. She ended up living mostly in one room at Kimbleton, only leaving for Mass. She lived very austerely, wore a hair shirt like a Franciscan, fasted often.
And that separation from Mary must have been torture.
Unimaginable. They were completely forbidden to see or write to each other. Those sympathizers apparently smuggled letters between them secretly.
Did Henry offer them better treatment if they acknowledged Anne?
He did, but both Catherine and Mary refused point blank.
Incredible resolve. Towards the end, knowing she was dying, she made a will. And there's that famous last letter to Henry.
Yes. Late in 1535, she sensed the end was near. Made her will, asked her nephew Charles V to look after Mary. The letter. Well, its exact authenticity is debated by some historians.
But the sentiment.
The sentiment is widely accepted as reflecting her final thoughts. Forgiveness for Henry, deep concern for Mary, asking him to provide for her loyal servants. And that line, "Mine eyes desire you above all things." So poignant.
She died at Kimbleton in January 1536. And even then, controversy followed. Rumors.
Immediately, rumors of poisoning started flying. Some even pointed fingers at specific people like Gregory de Cassala.
And the reactions of Henry and Anne? Accounts differ.
Wildly, some say Anne wore yellow, which could be seen as celebrating or maybe the Spanish color of mourning. Others say she wept. The imperial ambassador reported Henry celebrated. It's hard to know the absolute truth.
And then Anne miscarried on the day of Catherine's funeral.
Yes, she miscarried a male child, which of course only fueled more dark rumors about Catherine's death.
The embalming revealed something unusual too, didn't it? A black growth on her heart.
It did, which intensified the poisoning suspicions at the time. But modern medical thinking is that it was almost certainly cancer, something they wouldn't have understood then.
So she was buried in Peterborough Cathedral, but not as a queen.
No, the ceremony was for a Dowager Princess of Wales. Henry didn't attend, and he forbade Mary from going too.
Despite everything, her deep Catholic faith seems to have been her anchor throughout her life.
Absolutely fundamental. She is part of the Third Order of St. Francis, very pious, very devout in her personal practices, Mass, prayer, confession.
She made that statement, didn't she? I would rather be a poor beggar's wife.
And be sure of heaven than queen of all the world, and stand in doubt thereof by reason of my own consent. It perfectly captures her priorities.
And despite her outward conformity, she was aware of issues within the church itself.
Oh yes, she wasn't naive. Privately, she understood the problems within the papacy. Alfonso de Villasancta even dedicated a theological book to her. There was even talk she might have been named Defender of the Faith herself before Henry took the title.
And in her youth, she was considered a great beauty.
Widely so. Descriptions called her the most beautiful creature in the world. Even later, figures like Thomas More remembered her striking looks in her prime.
Her legacy is certainly endured. What are the key aspects of her impact?
Well, there's commissioning the education of a Christian woman by VIII, quite forward-thinking on women's education for its time.
Right.
Thomas Cromwell's famous quote about her potential if she hadn't been female. If not for her sex, she could have defied all the heroes of history.
High praise, especially from him.
Her successful appeal for the rebels after the evil May Day riots, her charity work, helping the poor, her support for Renaissance humanism, her friendships with Erasmus, and more.
So more than just a wronged wife.
Much more. For many, she's a symbol of integrity, almost a martyr figure. And during her daughter Mary I's reign, her marriage to Henry was declared valid again, and Mary had portraits of her commissioned.
And her tomb at Peterborough Cathedral is still a focal point.
Very much so. People leave flowers and pomegranates her symbol constantly. The tomb clearly states Catherine, Queen of England.
It does now anyway.
Yes, Queen Mary of Teck in the 20th century had the grave improved and added banners confirming her status as queen. There's an annual service there for her.
And connections back to her birthplace.
Alcalá de Henares has a statue of her, and it's twinned with Peterborough. There are places named after her near where she was held, like Queen Catherine's Cross in Ampthill. Kimbleton School has the Queen Catherine building, and she's still a massively popular subject for biographies.
Even the spelling of her name is varied.
Reflects the times. Born Catalina, but in England, Catherine took hold. She signed her name various ways: Catherine, Katharina, Catherine. Arthur called her Princess Catherine. Mary called her Queen Catherine.
And Henry's love knots.
Often had H and K intertwined. Her tomb uses Catherine. It's such a powerful story, isn't it? Privilege, politics, personal tragedy, but above all, that incredible strength of conviction. Catherine of Aragon's dignity under immense pressure really leaves a lasting impression.
It really does make you think about the pressures on royal women throughout history, caught between dynastic needs and their own beliefs, their own lives. What part of her story stands out most to you? What does it tell us today about holding on to your convictions against the odds? It's definitely a life that prompts a lot of reflection.